Hi, folks. My name's Rick Dudley. I'm going to be giving a very short talk in terms of my talking on bridging, CosmosSDK chains with Ethereum Mainnet. And let's wait for some confirmations that people can actually hear me. Hello, Venus. Hello, crypto space. All right, wonderful. All right, so kind of the opposite style of the last talk, which I caught little bits of. I'm not a big slides guy, so apologies for that in advance. Also, I tend to like my talks to be like focused on audience questions, which doesn't really work with this technology. So we'll see what I can do about that. Hopefully the recording contains the text as well as the video. We'll figure that out when we get to it. All right, who am I? I'm Rick. I work on blockchain stuff. Best way to find out about it is just read through the Twitter. I don't really like people to look up websites or whatever. I mean, you can just sort of, figure it out. Most of my work is actually building federated Tendermint chains that then talk to Ethereum. So a lot of my clients are building systems that work in that way. I think if someone wants to know more about that at the end of the talk, I can get into exactly how that came to be. But let's just try to get through these slides and then come back to that sort of, I think, important historical context. Okay, so Cosmos is obviously Internet of Blockchains. That's what they're known for. Frankly, to be entirely frank, in terms of market share, it as much as technically superior and theoretically and philosophically superior as I believe Cosmos to be, that's not really reflected in the price of the asset of the atoms. So it sort of brings, oops, there's a typo in there. That's funny. We'll just leave that in there. That just brings to the question of, is the Internet of Blockchains a good idea? Answer is yes. It's kind of the only idea. And what I mean by that is if you look at what's going on with Ethereum today and their phase 1.5 of ETH2, that's very close to Cosmos. If you look at what Polkadot is, which is obviously the original architect of Ethereum, is the architect of Polkadot, Gavin Wood. Polkadot borrows an enormous amount from Cosmos. And again, if people want to, I'd be happy to argue with people about this, but there's basically two types of scaling of a blockchain. You can do top-down scaling and bottom-up scaling. And if you want certain types of finality and programming guarantees, you're basically stuck with bottom-up or an avalanche-style network, which I think it remains to be seen if that style of top-down scaling actually works. Since I don't know of any production apps on that chain, but I think they're probably the best top-down competition. I don't think Polkadot is going to really, well, let's not talk about that. All right, so Bitcoin is sort of off the table actually because of what Charlie said in the last talk. You can't really interop with Bitcoin, and that's intentional, very much a community decision. And I personally respect that decision. So no reason to argue with that. And then, you're going through market cap. Number 2 in market cap is Ethereum. So, I cheated my own talk here. But, the Ethereum community and the Cosmos community are very close. People may not know that. I started working at Consensus in 2016. And that's how I actually learned about Tendermint, was because the belief at the time actually was that something very similar to Tendermint or Tendermint itself would be what ETH2 is now. And there's just a lot of relationships like, Canadian friendships that sort of link the two projects together historically. And I think that there's also sort of community zeitgeist is actually pretty similar amongst the two. They're similar in age and emerging from the Bitcoin community. So there's a lot of community synergies there. So that's, I think, why people look towards interoperating with Ethereum. The second reason, which is pretty obvious, it's where the money's at. So since you can't really interop with Bitcoin, which is number one, the next guy with money is Ethereum, so you interop with them. What are the challenges connecting to Ethereum? Well, Ethereum is a proof of work based chain. I'm sure many other talks have already discussed. There's a difficulty in terms of finality and getting fast finality and probabilistic finality, and you can't really get the right kind of finality that you want from a proof of work chain. To make matters worse, Ethereum has this zany thing that it calls Ghost, which is inspired by another protocol called Ghost, but is actually a very different protocol, which sort of amplifies, or it makes the problem with finality more acute. And I think that it actually addressing Ghost properly is really difficult. Because you end up in a situation where you actually have to look at, if you want to predictively determine, you have this probabilistic finality that you're trying to figure out which of these possible worlds is going to be the canonical chain. You actually have to look at the state changes, not the transactions in the blocks, but the new Ethereum state that's generated, and actually extracting that state from the client is extremely difficult, and what I spend way too much of my life working on. The other challenge, this is probably a really big challenge, is for something like Peggy, for example, gas costs are prohibitive. You can't just, for as interoperable as Ethereum is, because of this sort of issue with signatures, it's very difficult to cheaply interoperate another blockchain with Ethereum, because actually getting the messages from that other chain onto the Ethereum mainnet in a trust minimized way is pretty expensive. So one of the ways that you would address this cost would be using precompiles. That is very difficult for a point I'll get to later. On the other hand, if you wanted to create these sorts of the equivalent of a precompile is basically something in Ethereum that is accessible, is a feature that is like C code or Go code running in the client, but it's accessible through the smart contract. It's sort of like this magic bridge to make things cheaper. It's pretty tricky to get those in, politically speaking. And there can be like actual tricks, complexity to actually having the game theory be sane on them as well. CosmosSDK chains just don't have that problem. And that's actually maybe the single biggest reason for a small federation to choose, in my opinion, to choose Cosmos over the EVM, is the ability for you to write your own custom code with that whatever tool you want to use is much, much easier. And that's actually what you want to do. So the other challenge, which is maybe the biggest challenge, is everything's decentralized, right? So, the EF does not, the Ethereum Foundation does not, does minimal work to direct the development of the project. ETH2 is sort of a misdirection there. It looks like there's a large amount of coordination coming from the EF there. Without getting too into Ethereum politics, I don't think that's actually the case. I think if you look at other things like Geth development, Go Ethereum development, or like Ethereum JS development, you can see the sort of light touch absence of the foundation, which is very much by design and their intent, whether for better or worse. And then on the Cosmos side, or the ICF side, I've had contracts and grants from both organizations. The ICF is a much more direct and organized organization. So in that sense, they're much easier to deal with, but still there is, I think, something that's endemic to Swiss Foundation-based blockchain projects. There's a sort of lack of like corporate focus. Like if I have a company as a client, and I have some of my clients are blockchains that are run through like more traditional corporate structures, they're very explicit about what they want. It doesn't change over time. There's not really this grant proposal process, which can be clunky at times. But it works, but it can still be clunky. When you're dealing with like one of these corporate chains, they're just like, we want these 5 things. Here's the money. Give us the stuff. And so when we're talking about connecting Cosmos and Ethereum, you're talking about having 2 of these Swiss foundations or 2 of these really truly decentralized communities trying to sort something out, and you get lots and lots of politics. So that manifests itself in very complex ways. That is a 3-hour talk on the Ethereum side of things. I could talk a lot about some of the complexities around the last speaker's employer and how they have changed the Ethereum ecosystem in a very dramatic way in a very short period of time. But yeah, there's just a mountain of politics in Ethereum. And then on the same note, on the Cosmos side, we have, even though there is a very strong narrative drive behind IBC, you still have, the nomic Bitcoin peg. You still have the relayers that were used in Game of Stakes, Ethermint, Peggy. There's more that I'm not naming. There's a lot of different plans or ideas that people have for interoperability. And I think that overall that's good. And I think that if all of these people were in like one department at like Bellcore or whatever, it would be awesome. There would be no downside at all. It would all get sorted out. People would be able to collaborate over the water cooler or what have you, and we would be making enormous progress. Not to say that we're not making significant progress now, but it's very slow, and it's slowed down because everything is decentralized. The other issue is all of these solutions are ultimately indirections. And there's a great RFC that I may tweet about later after I've actually read it that talks about this problem. It was written in 1982, and it's talking about there seems to be this proliferation of networks. They're not IP networks in 1982, but they're talking about private computer networks. And we have this problem that we have to use gateways to connect the networks together because they don't speak a common language such that a node in that network can just talk to another node in a different network. It's actually like formally impossible is basically what the guy is arguing. And we have a similar problem along multiple axes in the blockchain space. And so basically, we've already decided that we're going to use a gateway as a form of indirection. We're not going to have it semantically simply doesn't make sense for like it's almost hard to even think of an example because it's so heterodox. But like an Ethereum dApp can't trustlessly read the state of a Bitcoin UTXO. We know that that's not possible. You have to have some form of indirection. You have to have some sort of like choke point or bottleneck to do that. We want to maintain our trust minimization. So how do we minimize our trust while creating these gateways? That's a very difficult problem because it doesn't generalize very well, which is again part of why we have so many cross-chain implementations in the Cosmos ecosystem. So my solution to that, sort of a lot of my work, I started working in the blockchain space in 2016. Prior to that, I was a systems administrator. And one of the things that has sort of I've really come to terms with over the last couple of years managing teams is engineering parsimony, right? You can, and what I mean by this is, as a theoretician sitting in your armchair, you can have a great idea that you know is like awesome and solid. For example, you can say the validator set of this particular Tendermint chain will authorize state changes on Ethereum. And you know that that is theoretically possible. You're very confident that in a theoretical framework that is possible. And then you start reading about signature types. And you realize that that's a bit of a nightmare. That as a practical matter, the way Tendermint, I don't know the names of the different things anymore because I still think of it as Tendermint SDK, which it's not. But the model, the ABCI model really excludes the idea of the validators being able to. So Tendermint is a system for a bunch of people or a bunch of entities to get together and cryptographically sign these state changes. And you would think that, and via a gossip network, via this DHT. And you would think that, oh, well, they have to sign the same thing. They have to do the same thing if they wanted to post a message to Ethereum. But what the validators can and can't sign within the Cosmos SDK framework excludes that, which I think is, in terms of engineering parsimony, the correct choice to make. But when you're trying to collaborate with the community and design a system that everyone buys into, there's always this, in my experience in the last 4 years, engineering parsimony, which is the only way that software can be made because software is so difficult to make, really interferes with the ability to actually iterate towards a functional system. And so, and we see that in both the Ethereum ecosystem and the Cosmos ecosystem, that we haven't been able on either side to incrementally innovate towards a working two-way peg system, because basically this Occam's razor, this engineer's razor that's used, basically makes sure the process will never be successful. And so my solution to that is this very direct solution that is obviously suboptimal in a lot of ways, but it will actually, you can actually reason about it and kind of at least talk to people about it and have some hope of getting them to do it. So that's basically the preamble. So the super hand wavy proposal is use an existing Ethereum L2 solution to create a peg zone. And there's extra complexity in that. There's a lot of extra complexity in that. As other people have mentioned today, there are some impedance mismatches between, Ethermint is constrained in what it can do because of, these sort of impedance mismatches in the models, and the fact that Ethereum has some zaniness in its own model that's just difficult to interoperate with. But I think that the other thing, the second point, what I'm really getting at here, L2 and peg zones are basically the same thing. If you're a researcher and you are not entirely immersed in both communities, you would think that an Ethereum shard is somehow dramatically different from a Cosmos zone. And they're really not. I mean, they're basically, so here's the problem. When people, and this was actually also discussed in another talk today, where someone was talking about, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it was, but they're talking about the problem with English language specifications and how they're imprecise. And we have the same problem when we're talking about the difference between L2 and Cosmos zones. Is there's all this sort of idiomatic language that's used to describe a shard. And if you're really technical and you work through it, you're like, this description is incomplete. It doesn't actually make sense. There's serious details missing. And so as much as you can make sense of the Ethereum model of a shard, and I would make the same argument for Polkadot, frankly, those things are Cosmos zones. So a Cosmos zone, I think, is in many regards far better specified than an Ethereum shard, but they're really the same thing. And so really, when someone's talking about optimism, optimism, if you just had your optimism operator running as a Tendermint validator set, that would solve a lot of these problems. So I actually was working on a solution. I am still working on a solution to do that, but it's very early and very tentative. So I don't want to keep talking about that. I'm happy to, oh, wait, let's see. What is my next slide? There you go. So I'm happy to talk about whatever in whatever time I have left. But yeah, that was my talk. Well, Josh, I'll actually answer your question to Zaki while other people hopefully type some questions somewhere. I think pretty much, and I don't mean this disrespectfully to the people that formed Swiss foundations, because there's relatively few of them and there was no way to know at the time. But I think almost any other structure would be better than a Swiss foundation. I think that and I've done a fair amount of research into starting Swiss foundations. I have worked with multiple Swiss foundations. Tezos has had this, very tumultuous history in their foundation. The EF has had a lot of drama that they have mostly kept in private. It just sort of comes out as these weird. You don't really see all the palace intrigue with Ethereum, but it's there. I think that the Swiss foundation model, I think many of the models that we see in the blockchain space, unfortunately, are incompatible with basic research. And so honestly, I think like a Bellcore model, that to me is like the fantasy model. Maybe that's just like my childhood sort of impacting my adulthood, but I feel like if we were all just working at like Bellcore, we would all be a lot happier, and the investors would be a lot happier because they get higher quality output per dollar. Okay, I see 2 questions, which is amazing. Are you hopeful that eventually BTC will? Okay, I'm going to let someone fix that. How would you compare your proposal? So my proposal relies on Peggy. So Peggy basically, Peggy's great. Peggy resolves some of these interoperability issues by placing the trust anchor on the Cosmos SDK side. So basically, if something goes wrong, people are made whole with the tokens on the Cosmos SDK side. And for brevity, I'm brutalizing a lot of the details here. In my proposal, which we're tentatively calling Optimos, the trust anchor is on the Ethereum side. And the reason we do that is again, very parsimonious and straightforward. It's because that's where the money's at. The money is on the Ethereum side. People want to use Cosmos at this point, at this day and age. They want to use a Cosmos SDK app because it's faster, better user experience, better performance in terms of writing smart contracts and all of this. But their value is on Ethereum. So if something goes wrong, they want all their value to be safe on Ethereum, not on the other chain. So that's the main difference between what I'm proposing, which unfortunately I didn't really put into slides here. It's not ready, compared to what Peggy is doing. Okay, sorry. Are you hopeful that eventually BTC will be able to interoperate flying around the Cosmos in a trust minimized way? Yeah, I think TBTC and RIN are similar in my view. although it's hard to say because RIN is still closed source. And I think that they do show a path towards interoperability. And they are effectively, I mean, again, narratively, they're very similar to the narrative of a peg zone, both of those projects. And so I think that there's that's already happening on the Ethereum side. And I think that there's on the Cosmos side, there needs to be a commitment towards picking a single thing from a marketing and narrative perspective and executing on that, and then it would happen. Yeah, I'll try, Mo. Can I roughly go over different ETH L2 styles and their relative suitabilities for this approach? Yeah, so there's basically two big branches of well, like cogent branches. There's all kinds of zany stuff that people do that we can just ignore. There's basically fraud proofs and validity proofs. And I think if you're looking at this through a cryptography lens, this distinction is somewhat offensive, and apologies for those people. But basically, so the L2 is some state that's happening at a much higher frequency, that's the whole point, than the L1 chain. And you want to canonicalize those L2 state changes onto the L1 chain, and you want to be able to have some sort of security, either cryptographic or economic, that when you see an L2 state change published to L1, that it's valid and that you can determine that it's correct relatively easily. So validity proofs do this with ZK snark technology for the most part. They generate a ZK snark and then publish that to the chain. And again, I'm being very terse for time's sake. And then that's how you do it. The other alternative is a fraud proof, where you basically Merkleize data. So you generate a Merkle tree or some other Merkleized data structure. You publish that on chain, and then if someone can challenge that publishing, they get a reward, or something gets fixed, or something gets repaired. Those are the two sort of major branches. I'm actually personally a fan of fraud proofs. I think the cryptography behind validity proofs is onerous, and programming in a snark environment is onerous at this moment. I think eventually validity proofs will be the way to go. Interestingly, inclusion proofs are a type of validity proof. And so something like Optimism, for example, uses both fraud proofs and inclusion proofs, which are, again, there's always these confusing language barriers. Yeah.
Cool. So I think we're out of time. We need to transition to our next session.
Yep. Thanks so much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. This was great.